So, here's the deal, I'm a 22-year-old guy, and I was saving up for college. My parents, well, let's just say they had other plans. I always thought I was their priority. I mean, they made it clear that my education was important, that my future mattered. But when the time came to put their money where their mouth was, they made a choice that changed everything. My younger sister, Sarah, was getting married. She's 20, and while I'm really happy for her, something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. Especially when I found out that my college fund, the fund that my parents had promised was mine for school, had been completely drained to pay for her wedding. Just like that. Gone. I remember the moment I found out. I was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone, when my mom casually mentioned something about needing more money for Sarah's wedding and how she and my dad had to take out a second mortgage to make it all happen. I barely processed it at first, thinking she must have misspoken. But then it hit me. The heavy truth. The one that rattled me deep in my gut. My college fund wasn't just touched, it was gone. My parents had dipped into it to cover my sister's wedding expenses. No warning. No conversation. No heads up. Just poof. To say I was pissed would be an understatement. It was like everything I'd been working for, every ounce of trust I'd placed in them, was a joke. A joke they were laughing at while they made my sister's special day more important than my future. I know, it's her wedding, it's a huge deal. But at the same time, shouldn't they have considered what this would do to me? The anxiety, the stress, the pressure of figuring out how I was going to pay for school. They didn't seem to care. I tried to hold it together at first. For days, I just let it sit in the back of my mind, trying to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't a big deal, right? Maybe they had a good reason, maybe they just couldn't help it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, no, this was wrong. I couldn't just sit back and take it. My future wasn't a game. I was determined to make them see that. To make them realize just how badly they had screwed up. I had worked for that money. I'd been doing extra shifts at a part-time job, putting in hours while still trying to be a good son, a good student, all for the one shot I had at getting into college without drowning in debt. And then, there they were, tossing my efforts aside like they didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. So, I did what anyone would do in my shoes, I took control. It wasn't the easiest decision I ever made, and trust me, I wasn't exactly thrilled about it, but I wasn't going to let this slide. I had to make them apologize. I had to show them that they messed up in a way that was going to force them to take responsibility. No more walking all over me. No more taking me for granted. The problem? They didn't take me seriously at first. You know how parents can be, they don't always think you're capable of standing up for yourself. They probably thought I'd back down. That I'd just whine about it for a while, maybe sulk a little, then forget about it. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I was ready to go to war, quietly, patiently, but absolutely ruthlessly. I started planning. I knew I couldn't just charge in with a bunch of emotions and make demands. No, I needed a strategy. I needed to make them see how much damage they had caused. And I needed to do it in a way that would force them to admit it, to apologize. There would be no moving on or sweeping it under the rug. But it wasn't going to be easy. Not with my parents. They can be stubborn. They can dig in their heels like you wouldn't believe. So, I had to figure out how to break them down, piece by piece, without making it seem like I was attacking them. I'll tell you right now, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It was going to get messy. But I had to do it. I couldn't let this go. Not for me, not for my future, and definitely not for the kid who thought it was okay to use my future as a stepping stone for her wedding. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to do something. The first few days after I found out were pure chaos in my head. Just this storm of emotions, anger, confusion, disappointment. I kept replaying the conversation with my mom, trying to find some way to make sense of it. Maybe they didn't know how much it would hurt me, I thought. Maybe they just didn't think I'd care that much. But there was no denying it. I cared. A lot. I knew I needed to talk to them, but how do you confront your parents about something this huge without it turning into an all-out war? The way they'd been acting, like nothing was wrong, like this wasn't the biggest betrayal I'd ever experienced, just ate at me. But I couldn't rush in guns blazing. If I did that, I'd just get shut down. No one listens to a guy who's just out here throwing around accusations and getting emotional. So I decided to start small. I spent a couple of nights rehearsing what I was going to say, trying to frame it in a way that didn't sound like a personal attack, but more like an I just want to understand kind of deal. I'd never really had to do anything like this before, stand up for myself in a way that made them feel the consequences of their actions. My sister Sarah, she's always been the loud one, the one who gets attention, the one who gets what she wants. I've always been more reserved, quieter, the type who does everything right but still gets overlooked. I was so tired of being that guy. And yet, here I was, trying to play it cool while I was seething inside. But I couldn't just yell at them. That would have been easy, sure, but it wouldn't have fixed anything. I had to make them see how messed up this whole situation was. The hard part was figuring out where to even start. So, I went for the big conversation. You know, the one, the sit down and talk it through kind of deal. That Saturday night, after dinner, I asked if we could talk. They seemed so casual about it. Like, no big deal, right? They didn't even know what was coming. I could feel my heart racing. I had to make them hear me. I started by trying to stay calm. I asked about the wedding budget, just something casual, you know? Like, hey, how's the wedding planning going? I could tell right away that my mom wasn't really listening to me, so I followed up with, how much did the wedding end up costing, if you don't mind me asking? The second those words left my mouth, I saw her face shift. But I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't about the wedding anymore. This was about my future. And I made sure to remind them of that. I know the wedding's important, I said, but I've been working my ass off to save for college, and I just found out you used all of that money for Sarah's wedding. You didn't even ask me if it was okay. You just took it. And boom, there it was. The look on my dad's face was priceless. He went from his usual everything's fine mask to full-on defensive mode in a split second. I knew I had hit a nerve. Well, son, you know how these things are. Sarah's been planning this for years. She needed the help. We didn't think it would be a problem to pull from the college fund, and it's not like you didn't have other options. My dad trailed off, the words suddenly feeling less like an excuse and more like a desperate attempt to justify their actions. It was infuriating. I had worked so hard for that money. I knew that if I just stayed calm, if I just showed them how serious I was, maybe they'd finally realize just how messed up this was. But the more they talked, the more their excuses grated on me. My mom was the worst, though. She started going on about how weddings are only once in a lifetime, and how important it was for Sarah's happiness. All I could think was, but what about my happiness? What about my future? By this point, my blood was boiling. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it was hard. This isn't just about money. This is about trust. You told me this money was mine. You told me that it was for my future. My words were coming out fast now, but I didn't care. I couldn't hold it in anymore. And that's when my mom said something that almost made me lose it. She said, well, we did what we thought was best. You'll figure it out. You're a smart kid. Smart kid? Was that really all I was to them? Some smart kid who could figure it out when they destroyed the one thing I had been depending on. I was about to lose it. I couldn't stand it. I needed them to understand the weight of what they'd done. To them, this was just a wedding, just another milestone in their daughter's life. But to me, this was my shot at a future that didn't involve working 2 jobs just to survive. And it wasn't fair. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just sit there and get talked down to. I was going to make them feel this. They had to understand what it meant to take someone's future and toss it aside for convenience. They needed to apologize. The days after that conversation felt like I was walking on a tightrope, trying not to fall. Every time I saw my parents, it felt like they were tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. They didn't want to talk about it, but I sure as hell did. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I knew I had to do something drastic. But I wasn't about to lose my cool in front of them. I needed them to see just how serious I was, without letting them think they could push me around. I spent the next week gathering my thoughts, laying out my next move. I wasn't going to just sit there and let them pretend like nothing had happened. I had to get creative. I wasn't a kid anymore, and they needed to understand that. That Friday night, when my parents were in the living room watching some stupid movie, I decided it was time to set the next phase in motion. I needed a way to make them feel what I was feeling, without going full-on meltdown mode. I thought back to something my older cousin, Emily, once told me when she was dealing with her own family drama. If you want people to take you seriously, show them you're not afraid to stand up for yourself. Actions speak louder than words. So, I decided to start small, but hit hard. I texted them both at once. "Hey, I want to talk. Tomorrow. About the college fund." I didn't ask. I told them. No sugarcoating. No please or could we. This was me demanding to be heard. I knew it would make them uncomfortable, but that's exactly what I needed. I had to make them uncomfortable enough to feel guilty. My dad replied almost immediately. "Okay, let's talk about it after dinner." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence build. They knew I wasn't going to back down this time. The next evening, after a long day of stewing over everything, I went in with a plan. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to present them with facts, hard truths, and make them see the weight of their actions. I sat across from them at the dinner table, my stomach in knots. This wasn't just about college fund anymore. This was about me taking control of my life. And that terrified me. "So, we're talking about my future," I started, trying to keep my voice calm, but there was a quiver in my words that I couldn't quite mask. "You took money I'd been saving for my education, for my future, and gave it to Sarah for her wedding." I could feel the air in the room change, just slightly, but it was enough to make my pulse race. They both went stiff, like I'd just dropped a bomb on them. For a moment, they didn't say anything. The silence hung there, heavy, thick with tension. My mom cleared her throat first, trying to regain her composure. "You know we love you, right? And we wanted to help Sarah out. You were going to get into college either way. We just didn't think it was a big deal." "Didn't think it was a big deal?" I bit back the urge to snap, keeping my tone steady, though my hands were clenched tight on the table. "It is a big deal. You don't just take someone's life savings because it's convenient for you. You made a choice without asking me. Without even telling me. I had no idea. And now, my future's in limbo." They looked at each other like they were trying to find the right words, but I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. This wasn't just about explaining things away with some lame excuse. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. "You didn't even ask me if I was okay with this. You didn't sit me down and explain the situation. You just took it. And now I'm left scrambling. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples like he was already exhausted by the conversation. He spoke slowly, carefully. We didn't think you'd mind. You've always been independent, always managed to handle things on your own. And you didn't need that money right away. Sarah, on the other hand, needed it for the wedding. You'll still get to go to college. We're just trying to help her. It's her big day. It felt like my insides were on fire. My brain was screaming, but I had to stay calm. I had to make them see that this wasn't just a help Sarah situation. This was about me being left behind. That's not fair, I said, trying to control the anger bubbling up. It's not about just the wedding. You took away the one thing I had to look forward to. And now you're acting like I should just accept it. I could see it now. The wheels were turning in their heads. They didn't get it at first, but the more I pushed, the more I explained how this had impacted my mental state, my plans, and my future, the more they seemed to realize how wrong they had been. I wasn't just angry. I was hurt. They had crossed a line, and they needed to understand that. My mom spoke next, her voice softening just a bit. We never meant to hurt you. But we just thought, you've always been so responsible. You could figure it out. I am figuring it out, I snapped, then took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. But you've made it a hell of a lot harder. I need you to understand that. And I need you to fix it. There was a long pause. They didn't look at me. I could tell they were processing. It wasn't just a matter of money anymore. This was about respect. This was about them owning up to their mistake. They couldn't just hide behind their excuses forever. I want an apology, I said, my voice firm, unwavering. They both looked at each other, exchanging glances, and I knew this was it. Either they were going to finally come to their senses, or I was going to have to push even harder. The silence in the room felt suffocating. My parents were staring at each other, like they were trying to figure out how to undo what they'd done. I wasn't about to make it easy for them. They needed to understand how serious this was, not just because they'd stolen my college fund, but because they had undermined everything I'd worked for. Everything I thought we had built together as a family. I'm not asking for much, I said, my voice shaking but steady. I just want an apology. I want you to admit that you screwed up. You took something that was mine, something that I earned, and used it to fund a wedding. And then you acted like it was no big deal. There was this moment where I thought maybe, just maybe, they weren't going to give in. My dad leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face like he was tired, like he just wanted to go to bed and pretend this was all a bad dream. My mom, on the other hand, was looking at me with this mix of guilt and frustration. She wasn't angry anymore, but there was something about her expression that made it clear she wasn't sure how to fix this. We didn't mean to hurt you, my mom said softly, almost pleading. We thought you'd be okay. We thought you were strong enough to handle it. We thought you'd understand that Sarah's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. We didn't think. No, I cut her off, my voice sharp. You didn't think. You didn't think about how this was going to affect me. You didn't think about the fact that I've been planning for this moment for years, that this money was supposed to be my ticket to something bigger than just a part-time job. I don't want to be stuck where I am forever. I could see the shift in their faces. It wasn't an immediate change, but it was there. The realization was slowly creeping in, like they were finally seeing me. Really seeing me. Not as the kid who was always quiet and went along with everything, but as someone who had been deeply hurt by their actions. I'm sorry, my dad finally spoke, his voice rough. I didn't realize how much this was going to hurt you. We messed up. I don't know how to fix it. My mom nodded, tears brimming in her eyes now. We didn't mean for it to be this way. You're right. We took away something that belonged to you. And for that, I'm so sorry." It was like a punch to the gut. Hearing those words from them, actually hearing the apology I'd been waiting for, it wasn't exactly relief. It was more like a realization that they hadn't just screwed up, but that they were finally admitting it. They had finally heard me. But I wasn't done yet. No, I needed to make sure this apology wasn't just a get-out-of-jail-free card for them. I needed to make sure they understood that actions speak louder than words. I took a deep breath and looked them both dead in the eye. "Words are nice. But I need you to show me you mean it. I need you to fix this. You're not just going to tell me you're sorry and move on. I need you to make it right." My dad shifted in his seat, and I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. It was like something clicked. "You're right," he said, his voice quieter now. "I can't just apologize and expect that to be enough. What do you want us to do?" That was the question I'd been waiting for. This was my moment to take control, to make sure they knew how serious I was. I wasn't about to back down now. "I need you to make sure I have the funds I was promised. I want you to help me find a way to cover the cost of my education. I don't care if it's a loan, a payment plan, or whatever. But I need you to fix this. I can't do this alone." They both looked at each other, this time not in confusion, but in resolve. My dad sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping like the weight of the world was on them. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice firm now. "I'll help you get the money you need. We'll find a way to make this right. You're right, you've worked hard for this. We owe you that." My mom reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes full of regret. "I promise, we'll do whatever it takes. We didn't realize how much we were hurting you. But we're going to make sure you have what you need for your future." For a moment, I just sat there, letting it all sink in. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been prepared for them to try to dodge the bullet, to make excuses or downplay everything. But instead, they were actually owning up to it. They were going to help me. They were going to fix it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the power. I had forced them to see me, to acknowledge my pain, and to finally give me the respect I deserved. I wasn't the kid anymore. I wasn't the quiet one who just let things slide. I had stood up for myself, and now they were going to do what it took to make things right. I didn't say anything for a minute, just taking it all in. Then, finally, I looked up at them, my voice quieter now. "Thanks. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale moment where everything was fixed instantly. But it was a start. And that was enough for me." The days that followed were a mix of relief and, honestly, a bit of disbelief. I wasn't used to my parents admitting when they messed up. In fact, I could count on one hand the number of times they'd done it. But this time, it was different. They weren't just offering up an apology and expecting everything to go back to normal. No, they were taking real steps to fix things. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a little bit of control over my own life. It wasn't an immediate fix, though. I didn't get the money back overnight. It wasn't like they just handed me a check and said, "Here, all is forgiven." That's not how life works. But my dad sat down with me, and together we looked at different ways to cover the costs of my education. He reached out to a financial advisor to see what kind of loan options were out there, and my mom started working with me to set up a budget that actually made sense. We made a plan. And yeah, it took time. It wasn't perfect. But the fact that they were trying, that was what mattered. For once, I wasn't just the guy in the background who quietly accepted everything they did without question. I had made my voice heard. And I had forced them to see me, really see me, as an adult who deserved respect and consideration. There were still moments, of course, when the tension was palpable. Sarah, bless her, didn't quite understand what had happened. She felt a little awkward about it all. She didn't want to feel like her wedding was the cause of this family drama. I couldn't blame her, though. This wasn't her fault. It was my parents' decision, and they were the ones who had to own it. But with time, things started to calm down. My parents continued to work on getting the funds sorted out, and every time they'd make progress, I'd feel a little lighter, a little less weighed down by the anger I'd been carrying around for so long. It wasn't a perfect situation, and I'm not sure we'll ever fully erase the bitterness from that experience. But the fact that we were working through it as a family, instead of just brushing it under the rug, meant the world to me. I remember sitting with my dad one evening, a few weeks after everything had been said and done, and he looked at me with a little more respect in his eyes than before. "You did good, son," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "You stood your ground." We needed that. It was one of those rare moments where the words actually felt like they carried weight. Like my dad was seeing me as more than just the quiet, responsible kid I'd always been. I wasn't just the guy who kept his head down and did what was expected anymore. I had fought for myself. And they had recognized that. I guess what really hit me, looking back, is how easy it is to let things slide. To let the people around you make decisions without ever questioning it. I had done that for years, accepting that I wasn't the priority, that my needs always came second. But I realized, sometimes you have to force the issue. Sometimes, you have to speak up, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels like you're walking into a battlefield. I'm not going to lie, standing up to my parents was one of the hardest things I've ever done. There were moments when I was scared I'd lose them, or that they'd never see things from my perspective. But in the end, I learned something really valuable, that your voice matters. That even when the people who love you the most mess up, they can still come around. But only if you make them. Only if you demand it. And that doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you someone who knows their worth. As for my college fund, well, it didn't get fully replenished right away, but we worked something out. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get me through school. More than that, it taught me something far more important. I'm not just someone who accepts whatever life throws at him. I'm someone who has the right to stand up and demand better. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. In the end, I guess this wasn't just about money. It was about respect. About learning that family doesn't mean being a doormat. It means being heard, being seen, and being valued. And I'll be damned if I ever let anyone take that from me again.